Russia's staggering number of casualties in Ukraine isn't just crushing Russia demographically, it's also going to crush the Russian budget. Just how bad is it going to be for Putin to pay all the families whose lives he's ruined? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is a really interesting analysis from War on the Rocks, which, full disclosure, I actually used to write for War on the Rocks. But they're a great and oftentimes fun publication. But this analysis is actually of the estimated cost that Putin is going to incur given the number of wounded and dead soldiers within the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, they're using the open source estimates that as of May, which we now know is actually lowballing it. But Russia has likely incurred around 400,000 casualties, with over 100,000 of those dead, right? Now, here's the thing. Putin, in order to continue to attract new volunteers to the Russian military, right, that he hasn't been able to use conscription. He's had to rely on various forms of incentives, coercion. But the financial incentives are significant, especially for two groups of people. The first is impoverished communities within Russia. These are often linguistic minorities or people who are far away from the metropoles like St. Petersburg and Moscow. The other group is foreign nationals for whom the Russian ruble is comparatively valuable. And so these two groups really are strongly incentivized with large payments. And so a law passed before the war entitles the family of a soldier who's been killed for 3.3 million rubles. At about 90 to 1, that's $15,000, something in that range. And that's an insurance payment, an additional 5 million ruble payment from the state. Wounded soldiers are entitled to 3 million rubles per decree from the early days of the invasion of Ukraine. So again, let's for context, let's get the exact number here. 1 million rubles to USD, so we're using the same thing, right? Every million rubles is about $10,000. So we'll just use that to kind of do the napkin math in our head, right? So we've got $30,000 here, another $50,000 for wounded soldiers, right? And Putin also announced a separate payment of 5 million rubles to families, right? So $50,000. So a combined payment of, it seems like around 100,000 USD, right? And combining all the above, cost of payments, to a soldier killed in Ukraine, actually 140,000 USD. So you see how incredibly powerful that incentive could be for an impoverished community, right? As insane as that sounds. But to know your family will be taken care of is actually a tremendous comfort. It's one of the reasons why soldiers that deployed were almost required or strongly encouraged to get our own life insurance, which would pay out to the tune of around $1 million. The key difference is that in 20 years of conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, we incurred approximately the number of KIA that Russia incurs in about a week. So 2 decades of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan is offset by 1 week of Russian combat in Ukraine. So that's helping you guys scale this problem. And so when they run the numbers, they find that actually the payouts would total for dead and wounded soldiers, right? 2.3 trillion rubles. That is 6% of Russia's entire state budget. But here's the additional problem. It's not just one-time payouts. Those veterans are entitled to a level of medical care. And as they point out, that the Russian economy is going to take another 2% of their state budget if they want to meaningfully treat things like PTSD and other conditions, chronic conditions that these soldiers are coming back with. Because remember, grievous wounds, amputations, right? They require a continual level of support. Particularly, again, imagine soldiers with serious abdominal injuries. Like, it's hard to understate how these kind of injuries require sometimes lifelong care and supervision. You also have, which Russia almost certainly won't do, but we do in the United States, policies that say, listen, we understand that there are things and potential issues, health issues that may have been incurred as a result of service that you won't find out about until decades later, right? We'll say, hey, Agent Orange is a classic example. In the short term, it didn't cause injuries, right? But they found that, wow, a decade, 2 decades after the war, they said soldiers that were exposed to this stuff have a host of health problems that other soldiers don't. And that requires state spending and state care. So there are, of course, the reality is that Russia doesn't really ever intend to probably treat any of these soldiers, given that the number of Russian hospitals in the whole country has actually declined 20% since 2012. There's only 10 veterans hospitals in the entire country, and a hospital focused on psychological rehabilitation, there's only 32 beds in the whole country. Guys, I think 32 people have been traumatized by watching Russian combat videos, let alone the Russians in combat. 32 Russians have probably gotten PTSD in the time it's taken me to record this video. And when you look at Russia's overall budget, this is going to be a huge flippin' problem. Why? Because here is the Carnegie Endowment for Peace's 2024 Russian budget breakdown, in which, yeah, Russia's planning on funding about a third of their budget with oil and gas sales. Sure, that's cool. But the other part of that is going to come from 2 other sources, taxes and a deficit. Deficit just means taking out loans. Now, ask yourself, right? If you had to take out loans, right? The Russian interest rate is a little higher than the interest rate here in the old United States of America. Because again, what would Russia have to pay you for you to loan them money? Given everything we know about the sanctions, about the instability of the Russian system, about the strains the Russian economy is under, right? In the United States, we're a reliable actor, and the market demands like 5% from the United States. For Russia, it's 16%. That's the interest rate on their debt. So these guys are in a tight financial spot. The 16%, guys, is like used car shitty credit level interest rates. And that's the Russian state. So again, you can imagine what the debt payments are when you're financing this operation with a budget deficit. All right? Russia is going to spend a ton on defense, a ton on these social programs, something like 6% of their entire GDP, their whole economy, not their state budget, their whole economy is going to be soaked up by this war. The war is the Russian economy at this point. It's the only growing sector. But the problem is that you cannot simply the state cannot simply spend its way to economic growth, right? It can use it as a little bit of a supplement here and there to sometimes even help guide growth in certain sectors. But you cannot sit there and be like, we don't need an economy. The state is just going to buy shit and light it on fire, which is literally what the Russian war machine is doing. And it's buying lives and also destroying them. But the problem is that that's not real economic growth. It's meant to create conditions for growth, but because of the sanctions and because they're literally killing all their productive workers, that's not going to happen for Russia. But there's one other way out, one other way that Russia can beat this, and that is the money printer. It's in fact likely the only way that Russia is going to pull this off, by gradual devaluation of the ruble. That's right, lads. Hyperinflation is coming to Russia. Right? You cannot run this kind of operation indefinitely. Right? And for context, guys, you're like, well, America's spending a lot in Ukraine too. For context, the amount that the United States in total has spent funding and aiding Ukraine is about 1% of what Russia is spending. It is about 1/3% of US GDP. It might not even be that high, honestly. 1/3%. By contrast, again, Russia, 6%. So this is a Prius trying to out-tow like a Peterbilt, right? They're running in different directions. And the Russians have put their pedal to the absolute metal, but their economy is still just a little Prius. Tires are turning. That shitty engine is just going, right? Meanwhile, the Peterbilt driver is he's in first gear. He's barely tapped the gas. And that is the scale of the way this fighting is going, right? Russia's had to pull out almost all the stops in its economy. And in contrast, the U.S. is like, oh yeah, we got more artillery lying around. Yeah, how much could it cost us? Right? Like if the U.S. was making $100,000 a year, we have spent the equivalent of $30 on funding Ukraine, right? If you make $100,000 and we're willing to spot a friend $30 for what's that get you? Like 2 Subway sandwiches at this point. I don't. In case you didn't know, I don't go out to get much fast food, right? If you were ever willing, if you make $100,000 and you've ever spotted a friend $30, that's the equivalent of what the U.S. is doing. That's the scale of US aid to Ukraine, right? By contrast, this is the equivalent of a $6,000 expense, right? So if you make $100,000 and you go, oh, 6,000, dude, I can't have another one of these expenses come up. Like this is my entire emergency fund, right? So that's the context here. So RIP to the Russians. But we're also going to talk about the fact that for the Ukrainians, they're asking that they want to punish the Russian state more. They're begging, please let us smoke more Russian oil facilities. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But first, have you picked up your Strike gum? You should, because if you need a caffeine boost, Strike gum is the solution. It's the zero sugar energy drink alternative. 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece. It's made in the USA, veteran owned. This little puppy has the equivalent of a Red Bull, of a Monster, of an Amp Energy's worth of caffeine, but without any of the sugar. Plus, you're not hauling around a can. If you do anything with your hands, from hairdresser to electrician, you know that you can't. What are you going to do? Your job and sip a drink? No. Strike gum solves this. You keep it in your pocket, you pop it in, you chew it. It's mint flavored, so there's nothing weird about it. Your breath will smell better. Unlike a Red Bull, it makes you smell like a Red Bull. Anyway, strikegum.com. That's where you can get your new user discounts and your first responder discounts. And, you can sign up for all our sales. We just wrapped up our 4th of July sale, but we're also on Amazon. You can go to Amazon, just plug in Strike Gum, boop, 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 and it's all there. So pick it up, right? 1-click order. The link is in the description. Okay. So let's talk about Zelensky. Zelensky is out here saying, yo, it is crazy that the U.S. is not letting us hit targets inside Russia. Especially, they say, listen, this is sort of absurd because, as discussed, Russia is hitting not just military targets in Ukraine. Russia's hitting just random fucking targets. They hit a children's cancer hospital. What's wrong with you guys? Now, some of it is because Russia's recklessly indifferent, right? I maintain that Russia doesn't have enough cruise missiles that's going to hit a children's cancer hospital just to be an asshole. Like, if it had a bunch, if it was artillery shells, yeah, Russia would just be like, yeah, fuck them kids, right? Putin's an asshole. But when you only have like 2 cruise missiles a month that you can produce, and that's sort of what Russia has, I don't think they wasted them on the Children's Cancer Hospital deliberately. I think what happened is, in order to thwart air defenses, Russia's been flying its cruise missiles really low, right? Like really recklessly low. And that affects the cruise missile's ability to guide itself accurately onto a target. It also means that if there's a building in the way, of its final like approach, it may just run into that. And that's what I think may have happened. They may have been targeting like another government building in Kiev or something. But still, reckless indifference. It's like drunk driving. I didn't mean to hit that kid when I was driving drunk. I just did 6 stupid decisions leading up to it. Is the same thing as deliberately committing murder. Almost. It's manslaughter, but that's, you know what I mean. So Zelensky's saying, listen, Russia gets to play fast and loose with the rules, and we can't hit back. Now, Ukraine would not be allowed, and I don't think they would want to hit Russian like children's hospitals because they're not assholes. But what they do want to do is target Russian military sites. He says, it's a crazy question. We can't answer and attack Russian military sites in Russia because the military base, literally the military base where they're launching these cruise missiles, was too far away. We aren't allowed to strike it. He's like, we just have to sit there and take it, even though we know exactly where these cruise missiles are being launched from. Right? Now, Jens Stoltenberg, NATO head, acknowledged that Ukraine's right of self-defense includes their right to strike legitimate military targets on the territory of Russia, and certainly a military site that is launching cruise missiles falls in that category. And it seems like the U.S. has told Ukraine, if Russia's imminently planning on striking you from a site, you can hit it. But the problem is that there's not very distant cruise missile sites are you're not going to have enough notice, right? You can just be like, the cruise missile site just de facto exists. Its existence is constantly ready to strike Ukrainian targets. So, but we also know that Ukraine is targeting more and more Russian oil facilities. In fact, Ukrainian efforts have reduced Russian oil output by up to 17% this year. And again, given that it funds 1/3 of Russia's budget, you see how that is really hitting Putin where it hurts. And potentially the Russian people, they are going to get pissed off. If inflation makes you mad at 7, 9, 10%, right? And it's coming down here in the West, Russia's not going to have that. Russia's looking at 16% minimum. That's if they don't turn on the money printer. And they will. And they will. So the Russians are going to end up in a serious cost of living crisis. And it's going to be made worse by the Ukrainian tactic if they're allowed to use the long-range missiles that the West provides them. Now, the UK is close. There's also a lot of rumors that the US is also very close. It was the thing Zelensky asked Biden for. Again, he asked Biden very publicly, so it likely also got communicated to his aides, but it was meant to emphatically drive home the point that this is so important that if Zelensky could ask Biden one thing, he was like, let me shoot the goddamn Russian cruise missile bases, please. So Russia, of course, is out here to cause trouble. It's still causing trouble. In fact, there's more, dude. This is just a crazy news day, and I don't know how else to like. It's all happening, dudes. It's all happening, right? It's the NATO conference, right? Russia is continuing to play games with GPS. In fact, there's still extensive GPS blocking going on near Finland. And remember, this jamming signal also impacts things like pilots, right? A Finnish maritime pilot recently said he experienced massive GPS jamming and radar interference literally 2 days ago in the eastern part of the Gulf of Finland, right? And that's dangerous. And it's dangerous, and it means that the GPS jammers that Russia was experimenting with and is using in Ukraine to thwart precision-guided weapons is now being expanded, right, to help deter Finland, a NATO country. So again, this is a dangerous game that Putin is playing, right? And Finnish authorities basically confirmed this incident, saying there was an unusually high level of GPS malfunctions, right? And this is believed to be part of, this isn't an accident, and they think this isn't like this isn't Russia targeting a this isn't Russia testing. This is Russia targeting, right? This is part of Russia's hybrid campaign against NATO states. And I think it's some of it. There's some aspects of this campaign, and I might talk about that in a separate video because it's intensifying, where Russia's targeting actual like Ukraine aid, Ukraine like munitions providers. But I think this is part of Russia's deterrent strategy. Russia says, listen, Finland, now you're a NATO member, that we don't have a huge military backup on this part of our border. But Russia needs to signal to Finland, we have other capabilities that you don't fully understand. And by launching this GPS, they're saying, just know that if you tried to pull something, Russia could turn off your GPS. You wouldn't know where to go. You'd be all confused, right? And Russia's own GPS alternative is not that accurate, but it's not going to be jammed, not inside Russia. So this is a potentially big deal, simply that it's Russia demonstrating a capacity. But you know who's not going to learn about this? The Russians. They're blocking YouTube in the fall. They say it's because of technical issues, but obviously YouTube doesn't have these technical problems in literally any other country on Earth. And so things will get worse in July and August, meaning YouTube functionality will worsen in some regions. And then they're going to wrap it up in September. The blocking of YouTube will start. So to my Russian viewers, sorry, bros. It is what it is. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Of course, a huge thank you to all the members of Combat Vet News. If you haven't become a member, they now do twice weekly uncensored combat footage and a weekly Q&A that you can ask me any question. Personal stuff. You can ask me tactical stuff, scenarios, what ifs, more strike gum, whatever you want. And, oh yeah, you get the shout outs for the Lieutenant tier. And if you really want to support the channel, if you really want to keep me independent, able to do this every single day, help me and the team, you can get the Colonel tier and get the by name shout outs, which, by the way, we rotate through. And this video, it's a huge thank you to Martin Baum, Greg Pace, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, James Ola, Chris Holmes, and Chris Gorse. Shout out to the double Chris's. I appreciate you guys so much. You really are the ones who enable me to do this. And if you want to become a member, the link is in the description and it's in the pinned comment. So just come on over and join us. It's a fun time. It's a little weird, but we like it that way. See you in the next one, guys. Cheers.